That's right, it's that time again. We're recalibrating, rebooting, and hitting restart on our infamous Anomatron 6000, the specialized supercomputer we've developed to simulate improbable scenarios between the SCP Foundation's various anomalies and any other characters from any other universe you could possibly imagine. On today's agenda, what do you think would happen if Johnwick, the notorious hitman, highly trained in all forms of combat, was up against an enemy that won't go down in a single shot, an undead menace known as SCP-008? Well, we're about to hit the button and find out, either by a pure unpredictable instance of human error or through the act of some twisted karmic fate. The SCP Foundation had an outbreak on their hands. A sample of the complex prion, a virus known as SCP-008, had leaked. The Foundation had hoped to keep the existence of the disease highly classified, even among its own personnel. Their fear had been that some hostile force would attempt to synthesize or even weaponize SCP-008. After all, the disease had a 100% rate of both infection and lethality. It killed anything it came into contact with, or at least, it killed them to begin with. Before long, everyone in the Foundation facility that had been exposed to the leaking sample of SCP-008's already infected victims was dead. Flu-like symptoms were followed swiftly by a coma. However, the disease hijacked the bodies of all those it had passed to, reactivating the motor functions of their corpses and turning them into, well, you can already guess. No one was safe. Even the mobile task force on the scene were soon infected with SCP-008. They had been a squad of rookies and fresh-faced new recruits, sent in by the Foundation under the assumption that an outbreak of this sort should have been easy to contain. It wasn't. The entire facility was soon overrun. The bodies of Foundation researchers, security officers, and MTF troops reanimated after their deaths, now jostling around in search of survivors to pass SCP-008 onto. "That should hold them!" Dr. Alto Clef yelled, locking the entrance to the watchtower tight. This really is another fine mess, Clef," his colleague Dr. Gears replied in frustration. "Our MTF backup are all down. We could be the last two people on site and we're locked in a tower with only one entry? Tell me, what the hell are we supposed to do now?" "Will you relax?" Clef insisted. "Don't worry, there's someone we can call to get us out of this jam." "Oh, don't say I know a guy," Gears sighed as his fellow researcher gave a wide grin and reached for his cell phone. A few moments later, and only a matter of miles away, another phone started ringing. Its owner, a man in a dark all-black tailored suit with a shadowy shirt and tie to match, reached into his pocket and lifted his cell phone to his ear. "Good evening. I apologize for calling you at this hour," came the unmistakable voice of Sharon, the concierge of the New York Continental Hotel. "That's quite all right," replied the suited man. "We received a call asking for your whereabouts, sir." "A job?" the man asked in a monotone voice. "Indeed," Sharon replied. "Up front?" "I'm afraid not," the hotel's receptionist answered sympathetically. "The contract is only in exchange for payment upon completion. The man who made the call was very insistent. He said he will be in no position to pay until the job is done. But he asked for you specifically and told us he'd be grateful for your assistance." The man on the end of the line sighed. "Where?" "Oh, don't worry, sir," the friendly concierge replied. "We're sending a car for you." At that precise moment, a yellow New York cab pulled up to the sidewalk. "Best of luck, Mr. Wick," Sharon said before hanging up the call. Straightening his suit, the infamous hitman John Wick climbed into the back of the taxi as it sped off towards its destination. Arriving at a complex upstate, far off the beaten track, John examined his surroundings while the car inched closer to the nearest part of the facility. His years of training as an assassin under the tutelage of Ruskroma had given him an instinctive spatial awareness, one that came in handy in his line of work. But even then, John couldn't have predicted that something would come leaping down from above, crashing through the cab's windshield. The car's hood buckled under the impact, fragments of glass spraying everywhere as an arm cracked the front window. The thing snarled and gurgled like a wild animal as it reached for the taxi driver, gripping his arm. It pulled him by the wrist, biting down, causing him to scream in intense pain. Meanwhile, John had already moved with lightning-fast reflexes and sprung out of the back seat. He hadn't had a chance to assess the threat. His instincts told him his best option was to put some distance between himself and whatever had just attacked the car. Then he'd be able to get a better idea what he was dealing with. The job description he'd been hired for had been light on details. John's mystery employer only referred to it as a, quote, cleanup operation. Sprinting towards the facility, John slammed the door behind him. He pulled off his belt from around his waist and wrapped it tightly around the door handles. It would hold for now. It was only when he turned around that he saw a few clustered groups of figures shuffling around inside the building's atrium. The nearest gaggle were close enough that it was easy for John to make out their pale skin, sunken eyes and cheeks, the unnatural twitches and erratic movements they were making as the creatures turned to look back at him.
"Zombies,"
Johnwick muttered under his breath.
"That's unexpected."
The nearby trio of SCP-008 infectees looked like they were about to make a dash towards him, so John moved fast. He raced towards a nearby corridor, hearing that the 3 zombies were already chasing after him. Their shambling footsteps had quickly become an animalistic charge, their limbs only able to move after death thanks to the virus that they were infected with. Turning a corner, John Wick took cover, his shoulder pressed to the wall. He drew his pistol from its holster underneath his suit jacket and stood in a battle-ready stance. The second he saw one of the zombies' faces appear around the corner, he raised his weapon and fired, swooping around one of his hiding places to fire another 2 shots. All 3 hit center mass right through their chests. The noise would no doubt have drawn the attention of the other SCP-008s in the building, but for now the 3 that had been on his tail dropped to the floor, only to start getting back up again. John wasn't used to his targets standing to their feet after he'd already fired at them, and the nearest of the zombies staggered back to his level. He lifted his firearm again. Before his finger could compress enough force on the trigger though, the undead abomination took a wild, flailing swipe at him. The SCP-008 instance knocked the weapon out of John's hand, causing it to clatter to the ground, while it reared back its other arm for a second strike. Catching the blow, Johnwick displayed his incredible reflexes and mastery of martial arts. He delivered a series of precise punches and chops, deploying a combination of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Aikido, and Krav Maga to try and knock the snarling monster down. With each hit, he was careful to avoid the zombie's mouth, having seen one bite the cab driver earlier. John had assessed that SCP-008 could be transmitted through biting, and he was correct. Exposure to mucous membranes or bodily fluids of an infected individual was what allowed the virus to spread. One of the other SCP-008 zombies that were still in the process of climbing back up swiped John's legs out from underneath him. The master assassin toppled over, landing on his back with the weight of the first monster still on top of him, while the second clawed at his tapered suit pants. Seconds before it could snap its teeth down on his ankle, John pulled back his leg and shot it back out in a devastating bicycle kick that sent the second zombie reeling into the third, which was still trying to get back up after its earlier gunshot. But the first of the creatures were still bearing down on him. Mustering as much of his peak physical strength as he needed, Johnwick held the zombie at bay, blocking it with one arm, stopping it from getting close enough to bite him. His eyes darted around, looking for something, anything he could use. That was one of John's most enviable and impressive skills, one that made him so renowned as a legend of the assassin world. In the hands of John Wick, any ordinary, everyday object could be a lethal weapon. Reaching out with this other hand, John felt his fingertips brush against something metal. It was so close, just out of reach. On top of him, the zombie flailed its arms, trying to claw at him. Lifting both legs in a fluid balletic motion, John Wick kicked the creature off of him, crawling towards the nearby object and grabbing it, just as the zombie started to approach again. With a swing and a loud metallic clang, the heavy fire extinguisher collided with the SCP-008 infectee's head. The force of the blow caused it to drop in an instant, landing in a heap on the floor. John waited a second to see if it would get back up again, but it was still. The other 2 zombies suddenly dashed towards the infamous hitman, only for their prey to duck and weave effortlessly between their aggressive clawing swipes, bashing his makeshift weapon against their heads like a battering ram against a door. All 3 were down, but the entire facility was still crawling with a mass of the reanimated monstrosities. Calmly, John smoothed his suit and straightened up his shirt and tie, walking with the fire extinguisher in hand, back down the corridor towards the sound of more SCP-008 zombies snarling. They were next. The Baba Yaga would use anything he found to take down each and every one of them, until not one was left standing. It didn't matter if all he had was a fire extinguisher, or one of the fallen security officer's batons, or even just a tiny pencil. Nothing would make it out of that facility alive. He just had to go for the head. Still trapped in the watchtower, Dr. Clef and Dr. Gears had long since grown irritated with each other's company. They had no security feeds, no way of knowing what was going on within the overrun Foundation facility. For a while, the pair of researchers had been toying with the idea of climbing out of a window and scaling down the side of the tower, but giving up on that plan when they'd realized they'd only be dropping back into a horde of SCP-008 zombies. A sudden explosion erupted from one corner of the complex, causing Gears and Clef to direct their attention towards it. From their elevation, they could see the ground below was littered with the bodies of the SCP-008 infectees, rendered lifeless once again by significant cranial trauma. In short, something had been bashing the zombies in the head. Or someone. The sound of a banging against the locked watchtower door startled both Foundation scientists. Instantly, they thought that the zombies had made their way up the steps and found the two researchers, easy prey, trapped in a cage. The heavy thud against the metal door repeated. Then there was a pause, deafening tense silence filling the room. A polite knock came from the other side of the watchtower entrance. Cautiously, Clef approached to unlock it. Standing in the doorway as it opened was a single figure, panting with exhaustion but still nowhere near beaten. He looked out at Clef and Gears from his dark hair, a stern expression on his face. Neither one of the researchers could believe that he was still alive, still uninfected, but then again, he was the one and only Johnwick, the Baba Yaga. Now go check out Boba Fett vs SCP-610 The Flesh That Hates, and SCP-076 Abel vs Chainsaw Man, who has the most lethal weapon, for more epic out-of-universe what-ifs.